All right, so everyone knows the name Zheng He, right?
Yeah.
But I bet most people don't know the full story.
Yeah. It's amazing, really.
So we're going to take a deep dive today
Right.
into this, honestly, kind of legendary figure.
Truly.
There's a lot of debate about Zheng.
Oh, yeah. Even historians can't seem to agree on everything.
Right. And that makes it even more interesting, right? So to help us with this deep dive, we're going to be using Zheng. His Wikipedia article.
It's a great starting point. We'll be able to learn a ton about his life and voyages.
Oh, and those ships. Let's not forget about those.
Those massive ships, yeah. So much mystery surrounding those.
Okay, so to get started, Zheng, he wasn't even born Zheng He. He was born Ma into a Muslim family. But then as a child, he was captured when the Ming Dynasty took over Yunnan.
Wow, talk about a tough start to life, right?
I know, and then it gets even crazier.
Oh, yeah.
He becomes a eunuch serving the Prince of Yan, who later becomes the Yongle Emperor.
Which is key to understanding his story, right?
It is. I mean, think about it. The Yongle Emperor kind of took the throne in a, let's just say, not so peaceful way.
Right, not a typical inheritance. He overthrew his nephew, led to a pretty brutal conflict.
And Zheng He, I mean, he was right there in the thick of it.
Which probably helps explain why he was so intensely loyal to the emperor.
Makes sense, especially when you think about those expeditions.
Huge undertaking, right? Imagine having to find someone you trust enough to lead a fleet of hundreds of ships.
And with tens of thousands of crewmen, too.
I mean, it's mind-blowing when you think about the logistics of that.
In the 1400s.
Exactly. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng, he leads 7 expeditions throughout Asia. We're talking Southeast Asia, India.
A Horn of Africa, even?
Even Arabia, like places that were just, like, unimaginable to most Europeans at the time.
And, you know, before we go any further, we have to mention that the Wikipedia article describes Zheng He as this, like, towering figure.
Oh, yeah. It says he was 7 feet tall.
It's over 7 feet tall.
And he had this powerful voice, was known for his military knowledge. It almost paints this picture of, like, a warrior diplomat.
And you kind of had to be right. You're not just going on these sightseeing cruises.
No, not at all. They were projecting power, showing off China's strength to the world. They were trading, too, of course.
Yeah, they were giving gifts of gold, silver, silk, porcelain.
And in return, they were getting exotic animals like ostriches and zebras, camels.
And who could forget about that giraffe?
Yeah, that giraffe was a big deal.
Like it was seen as this mythical quillin.
Right, a creature that symbolized a virtuous ruler. So to the Yongle Emperor, it's like this divine confirmation.
Talk about a public relations win.
Oh yeah, definitely reinforced his right to rule, that whole mandate of heaven concept. Super important for any Chinese emperor to hold on to power.
So we've got these massive expeditions, exotic animals, maybe even mythical beasts.
Right, but it all begs the question.
Yeah, what was the real purpose of these voyages? Was it trade, or just showing off, or was there something else going on?
Well, that's what makes this so interesting, because historians still debate this today.
Oh, for sure. Or in our Wikipedia article, it does a good job of outlining some of the different theories.
Yeah, some scholars point to the sheer quantity of goods that were exchanged, so they say it was all about trade. But then others argue it was more about demonstrating China's power.
Yeah, I mean, the size of the fleet alone makes a pretty big statement, right?
Oh, yeah. Plus, these weren't voyages of exploration, like they were sailing established trade routes.
They already knew where they were going.
Exactly. And when you consider that Zheng, he often dealt with pirates and, regional conflicts.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to use force when he needed to.
Which makes those descriptions of him, like, that imposing figure, even more interesting.
Right, and then there's the big question, the ships.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's heard those stories about the massive treasure ships, right?
Some accounts say they were over 400 feet long.
I mean, that's huge. Can you even imagine building a wooden ship that big, especially back then?
It's tough to wrap your head around. And honestly, we have to be careful about just accepting historical accounts at face value.
Especially those written, centuries later, right?
Exactly. Some accounts might be exaggerated or, they might have misinterpreted things. We have to consider what was actually possible with the technology of the time.
Which brings us to the archaeological evidence.
Right. The Wikipedia article talks about excavations at the treasure shipyard in Nanjing.
Yeah, they found these long basins there, right?
Yeah, but here's the thing. While the basins were long, they weren't wide or deep enough to have built ships of the scale described in some of those more dramatic stories.
So basically, those claims of 400-foot ships are probably a little far-fetched.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating, though, right? How archaeology can help us sort of fact-check historical narratives.
Absolutely. And that's what we're doing here. with this deep dive.
Trying to use both the historical accounts and the physical evidence to get a clearer picture of Zheng He and his voyages.
It's like detective work, but for history.
Exactly. And there's still so much more to uncover. Like, why did the Ming Dynasty eventually stop funding these expeditions? What were the long-term impacts of these voyages?
And what happened to Zheng He? Did he die at sea or back in China? So many questions still to explore.
And that's what we'll be tackling in the next part of our deep dive.
So make sure to join us then. We're going to be digging even deeper into the mystery and legacy of Zheng He.
And trust me, you won't want to miss it. It makes you wonder how much we still don't know about history, right? Like, for centuries, Zheng, he was just, a footnote, just these bits and pieces of information floating around.
Yeah, and then scholars like Lin Kikao in the early 1900s, they kind of brought his story back into focus.
Yeah, it really was like rediscovering this lost chapter.
Totally. Speaking of lost chapters, we were talking about how the official Chinese histories didn't really make a big deal about Zheng He's expeditions.
Yeah, they kind of downplayed them, for a while at least.
Any ideas why that might have been?
Well, you have to remember the context, right? Like, what was happening in the Ming Dynasty at the time.
Okay, yeah.
They had other issues to deal with. Like, the Mongols up north were a constant threat.
Oh, right, those land-based threats.
Yeah, and those took priority. They needed resources, armies, all of that. So these big expeditions, as amazing as they were...
Might seem like a luxury they couldn't afford.
Exactly. And then when they moved the capital back to Beijing in the north,
right,
it shifted the focus even more towards land defense, the Great Wall, all of that.
So those voyages might have been seen as a drain on resources.
Possibly, yeah. But here's the thing. Even if those official histories didn't give Zheng, he's his due. His legacy really seems to have taken hold in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, all those temples and legends dedicated to him, it's pretty impressive.
That's because these expeditions, they weren't just about, showing off or trading goods.
There was more to it.
Right, Zheng. He was also a diplomat, a cultural ambassador, building these connections that went beyond just politics or economics.
He was opening up trade networks, introducing Chinese culture to new places.
And bringing back new ideas to China, too.
It was a two-way exchange.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, these expeditions, they weren't about conquest.
No, they weren't trying to set up colonies or anything.
Right. They didn't impose Chinese rule on the places they visited.
More about establishing relationships, showing China's influence, but through peaceful means.
You could say it was an early form of, like, what we call soft power today.
Yeah, using culture and economics to achieve your goals.
Fascinating how those same strategies have been used throughout history, right?
It is. But let's maybe shift gears a bit. We've been talking about politics and economics.
Yeah.
But what about the cultural impact of these voyages? Like, how did Zheng He's crews actually interact with the people they met?
Ah, well, that's where Ma Huan comes in.
Right, Ma Huan, his book, Yin Ya Shenglan.
That book gives us such a vivid picture of those interactions.
It does.
Ma Huan was a translator, an official, and he sailed on several of the expeditions. His writings, they're like a goldmine for historians.
What kind of stuff did he write about?
Oh, everything. Local customs, languages, plants and animals, descriptions of these bustling port cities, religious ceremonies, even just like daily life.
Amazing detail.
It's incredible.
What about religion? Because Zheng, he was Muslim, but he also seemed to promote the worship of Mazu, the Chinese sea goddess.
That's right. It wasn't so much about playing both sides. It was more about how religion worked back then. Like in 15th century China, people often worshipped multiple deities from different traditions.
So like a blending of religions.
Exactly. Zheng He visited mosques, he connected with Muslim communities, but he also built temples to Mazu, for the protection of his fleet. He was honoring all of his beliefs.
Makes sense. Seeking blessings from wherever he could.
And it shows how religion could be this bridge between cultures, helping with communication and understanding.
So we've covered a lot, the reasons for the voyages, the size of the fleet, politics, culture, religion.
Yeah, we have.
But there's one more thing that I always wonder about. How did they navigate? I mean, no GPS, not even reliable compasses back then.
Right, but their navigational skills were incredible.
They were.
Oh, yeah. They relied on their understanding of wind patterns, currents, celestial navigation, all of that.
Wow.
We even have the Mao Kun map.
The what?
The Mao Kun map. It was published in the 17th century, but it was based on earlier charts, maybe even some used by Zheng He himself.
So what's so special about this map?
It's not really a map as we think of it today. It's more like a set of sailing instructions.
Oh, just...
It uses compass points, estimated travel times, that sort of thing, to guide sailors along these established routes.
It was like a nautical guidebook.
Exactly, and it shows how much they knew about the geography, even beyond China's borders. I mean, this map, it covers Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, even parts of Africa.
Wow, that's impressive. It just goes to show you shouldn't underestimate the knowledge of past civilizations.
You really should.
They were doing incredible things.
They were. This whole deep dive has really changed my understanding of China's role in the 15th century.
Mine too.
I never realized how far-reaching and impactful Zheng He's voyages really were.
It makes you wonder, what if the Ming Dynasty had kept funding them? Would China have become a major naval power even earlier? Would history have been completely different?
It's fascinating to think about, right? Like all those different possibilities.
It reminds us that history is not just this fixed narrative.
Oh, it's definitely not.
It's shaped by choices, by circumstance, maybe even just by chance.
Speaking of which, there's another kind of mystery surrounding Zheng, his death.
Oh yeah, the Wikipedia article mentioned some conflicting accounts.
Yeah, some say he died during his 7th voyage, or right after, in 1433.
But others say it was back in Nanjing in 1435.
Right, and that's part of the challenge when you're dealing with historical figures, especially from so long ago.
The records aren't always clear.
Right, they can be incomplete, contradictory, maybe even intentionally changed for political reasons.
Like we said earlier, those official histories weren't always totally transparent about Zheng. He's expeditions.
So it's not surprising if there's some uncertainty about his death, too.
And then there's the whole question of his burial.
Oh, yeah.
There's that tomb in Nanjing.
But it's thought to be a cenotaph, so his body's not actually there.
So where is he buried?
Well, tradition says he was buried at sea, somewhere off the Malabar coast of India.
Wow. Kind of fitting in a way, isn't it?
It is.
A man who spent so much of his life at sea in his final resting place is this mystery.
It just adds to the intrigue, right?
Definitely. So we've talked about his life, the voyages, the mystery of the ships, and now the mystery of his death.
Yeah.
What do you think it all means? Like, what's his lasting legacy?
Zheng, he's legacy. Well, it's complicated, isn't it? I mean, on one hand, he sort of embodies the ambition of the Ming Dynasty.
Yeah, those voyages, they were a real statement.
Right, like, hey world, look what we can do. But it wasn't just about projecting power.
Right.
Zheng, he also represents, like, exploration and cultural exchange.
Yeah, his voyages helped facilitate trade, spread ideas. People were exposed to different customs, cultures.
It reminds us that even back then, in the 1400s, the world was already pretty interconnected.
And we can't forget about the technological achievements either.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I mean, navigating those distances without modern instruments.
That was a huge accomplishment.
It really shows how skilled those sailors were.
They had to rely on their knowledge of the stars, the winds, the currents.
And they were sailing these massive ships.
Even if they weren't 400 feet long, they were still huge for that time period.
They were pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
Exactly, geographically and technologically. And maybe that's the most important part of Zheng He's story,
What do you mean?
It's a reminder that human potential, it really is limitless.
Okay, yeah.
He and his crews, they dared to go into the unknown to connect with other cultures.
To expand their world.
And that's something that can still inspire us today, to explore, to learn, to connect with the world around us.
Definitely. And who knows how many other mysteries are still out there just waiting to be discovered.
Right. Just like Zheng, his story changed our understanding of history. There are probably so many other stories just waiting to be found and shared.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. We started with just a name, Zheng He, and we ended up with this incredible story.
Full of adventure and mystery.
Cultural exchange, political intrigue, and so much more.
It makes you think about history in a whole new way.
It does.
And hopefully it inspires you to, keep asking questions, keep learning, keep exploring.
So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into history.
All right, let's dive into this one. Gustav Mahler's Symphony No. 2, The Resurrection Symphony.
Big one.
It is. We're using the symphony's Wikipedia page today as our guide. And, this symphony's, it's really famous for just how massive it is. We're talking 80 to 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Huge orchestra, vocal soloists. There's even a whole chorus in there.
A whole shebang.
A whole shebang. But, there's a reason the symphony was so popular back in Mahler's time. And I don't think it was just because it was, big and loud.
Right. It really gets at, I think this was one of the first pieces where Mahler really started to explore these ideas that he grappled with for his whole life. Life and death and the idea of resurrection. What might be beyond?
So, deep questions.
Deep questions, yeah.
Okay, so let's get into that title, Resurrection. I mean, was Mahler, was he being a little dramatic with that?
Right.
Or is there more to it?
I think it's more than just drama, right? This symphony's got a pretty interesting backstory. It actually started as just a single movement. Yeah, a symphonic poem called Totenfeier, which translates to funeral rites.
Okay.
Mahler wrote that back in 1888. But he really struggled for years to figure out how to make it into, a full symphony.
So what was the turning point? How did he figure it out?
Well, one big moment, I think, was in 1894 at the funeral of Hans von Bülow, who was another conductor.
Okay.
And during the service, Mahler heard a musical setting of a poem called Die Auferstehung. That translates to the resurrection, and it was by Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock. And the themes in that poem, the resurrection, the redemption, that really resonated with Mahler. And I think it really inspired him to bring those ideas into the finale of his symphony, both musically and through text.
So it really takes us on a journey, this whole symphony, right? It's not just a bunch of movements, but it's like a whole experience.
Yeah, you're going somewhere.
Yeah.
And each movement is really important to that journey. And the first one, the Allegro Maestoso, that really sets the stage, starts in C minor, very heavy. It almost feels like a funeral march.
Yeah, it definitely grabs your attention right away. It's heavy, very solemn feeling.
Yeah, and what's interesting is how Mahler starts to play with different keys within this movement. There's these little glimpses of E-flat major.
Okay.
Which ends up being the key that, the symphony resolves to at the end. So you're getting these hints of hope, even in all this darkness.
I love that, when composers do that, these little hints.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And then there's also that 5-minute pause.
Oh, yeah.
In the score after this movement. I've always been curious about that. Have you ever, actually experienced that in a concert hall?
It's pretty rare these days for conductors to actually do the full 5 minutes.
Really?
But even a shorter pause, I think, can be really powerful.
Yeah.
It's like Mahler's really giving us time to process everything we just heard. Yeah. Like letting it sink in.
Yeah. Let it sink in. It makes sense, after that first movement, which is so much about death and what might come after. So where does the journey go next after this, very intense opening?
Well, the second movement, the Andante Moderato, kind of shifts gears a bit. It's an A-flat major, has a much lighter feel, kind of delicate, dance-like. It's actually a type of dance called a Ländler, which is known for its kind of gentle, swaying rhythm.
Yeah, it feels like a breath of fresh air after that, heaviness of the first movement.
Yeah, and you have to remember that part of what this symphony is about is remembering a life, right? So this movement kind of lets us reflect on those happier memories, the joyful moments that make up a person's story.
Okay.
But, Mahler's always playing with complexity, so he still weaves in these darker sections, reminding us that life isn't always happy.
Yeah, there's always ups and downs. Okay, and then we move on to the third movement. In Ruhig Fließender Bewegung, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, but what's happening in this one?
That's a mouthful. This one's a scherzo, which is usually, kind of a lively, playful movement. But for Mahler, even the scherzo gets this darker, almost frantic energy. And it starts with these timpani strokes that really grab your attention. Boom, boom, boom,
It's so interesting to me that this movement, it's got connections to Jewish folk music.
Yeah.
And it even has a reference to Mahler's own setting of Des Antonius von Padua Fischpredigt, the story of St. Anthony preaching to the fish.
It's amazing how he's pulling in all these different things,
Yeah, different inspiration.
Creating his own kind of musical tapestry. And speaking of St. Anthony, I think Mahler once said that he thought his musical setting made St. Anthony sound a little drunk.
Oh, really? So he had a sense of humor about it.
Yeah, I think so.
It's nice to see that side of these, these great composers, right? They weren't just brooding all the time.
No, I mean, they were real people. They had a sense of humor.
But getting back to this movement, it eventually builds to this really intense climax, right? Like a jarring B-flat minor C chord that he called a cry of despair. And that kind of sets us up for the emotional ride that's to come.
Oh, yeah. Buckle up.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we've had the funeral march, we've had the happy memories, we've had the cry of despair. Where we go from here?
So the fourth movement, Irrlicht, which means primal light. That kind of takes us into a different realm, more introspective, spiritual.
Okay.
There's an alto solo singing a text about, really yearning for relief from suffering
Oh, wow.
and this desire to return to God.
So are we getting into more explicitly religious territory now?
I think it definitely has that feeling of spiritual yearning. But it's interesting because even though Mahler was a very spiritual person, he never really, defined his beliefs or said, this is what you should believe in his music.
Mm-hmm.
He leaves it open to interpretation, lets people connect with it in their own way.
Yeah.
Musically, this movement is in D-flat major, which is a pretty remote key.
Mm.
It feels very ethereal, distant,
Mm-hmm.
and it also kind of acts as a bridge to this giant finale that's coming up.
Ah, yes, the finale. This is the one that's like over 30 minutes long, right?
Yeah, massive.
I mean, that's basically a symphony in itself. Tell me a little bit more about it.
So it's really divided into two main parts. You have the first part, which is all instrumental, and it just builds this incredible tension.
Okay.
And then you have the chorus entering.
Yeah.
And that completely changes the feel of the piece.
I always love that part with the offstage horns in this movement.
Yeah.
It's so haunting.
It's like, this eerie March of the Dead. It's both creepy and cool at the same time. But the real heart of this finale, I think, is in the choral section.
Oh.
And that's where we'll pick up next time. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We're right in the middle of Gustav Mahler's Symphony No. 2, the Resurrection Symphony. And right before the break, we were getting to that part in the finale where the chorus comes in.
The chorus, yeah. That's really the turning point in this whole journey,
Yeah.
Remember how Mahler was so moved by that funeral he went to for Hans von Bülow? And he heard that poem set to music, the Die Auferstehung one?
Yeah.
Well, he actually takes text directly from that poem and puts it right into the finale. I mean, it's really like the core message of the whole symphony.
So the words themselves are like really important here.
Oh, totally. The text and the music work together, They create this unbelievable feeling of hope, like transcendence even. Mahler knew exactly how to use all those elements to get that kind of effect. Like, think about how the chorus enters. It's so subtle at first, almost like a whisper, barely there against the orchestra.
I can see that. It's like that little glimmer of hope starting to peek through, right? After all that darkness.
Exactly. And then it just keeps building, as the movement goes on. That whisper turns into this huge, powerful statement. When they get to the lines, mit Flügen, die ich mir errungen, you know what that means.
I don't think so.
With wings, which I have won for myself. It's like you're watching a soul breaking free from everything that was holding it back.
And it's right when that E-flat major key comes back, too.
Yeah.
The one that was hinted at all through the symphony, man, gives me chills every time.
It's powerful stuff. Mahler knew how to use the music to make those words hit you even harder.
So let's dig into some of those key lines, the text itself. What are some of the ones that really jump out at you?
Well, the very first lines from Klopstock's poem, they're pretty amazing. Auferstehen, ja auferstehen, wirst du mein Staub nach kurzer Ruhe. That translates to, rise again, yes, rise again, will you, my dust, after a brief rest.
Wow.
Such a vivid image, right?
Totally, like rebirth, renewal.
And then you've got Mahler's own words that he added, and they're just as intense. Like this one, O glaube mein Herz, O glaube, es gibt dir nicht verloren. O believe, my heart, O believe, nothing is lost to you. It's like this incredibly reassuring message, saying even when we die, there's something that stays with us.
It's comforting in a way. Speaks to that part of us that, wants to believe things last forever.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's the line that just goes right at the idea of suffering. O Schmerz, du alter Strenge, dir bin ich entrungen. O pain, you piercer of all things, from you I have been wrested.
Wow, it's like a declaration, breaking free.
Yeah, like overcoming all that pain, all the hard stuff that's just part of being alive.
It's amazing, how he takes us on this whole emotional journey. You've got grief, despair, little bits of joy, and then this huge wave of hope, this feeling of transcendence even. It's like he's saying, life's a wild ride with good and bad, but there's something waiting for us at the end.
I think that's exactly why this symphony still gets to people today. We all ask those big questions, right? About life, death, what comes after. And Mahler's music, it lets us face those questions head on. Feel all the feels and come out the other side feeling hopeful.
Not your typical happy ending, but definitely cathartic.
Oh, for sure. It lets you process all that tough stuff and still find some peace. Even joy. amidst all the uncertainty.
And it's amazing to me that Mahler, he was a spiritual guy, but he doesn't try to push any particular religion in this symphony. It's a message that anyone can connect with.
Totally. It goes beyond any one belief system. It's just tapping into that, basic human experience.
Well said. So as we get ready to dive even deeper into that finale text, what's one thing you want to leave our listener with?
I think really experience this symphony. Don't just listen, but, feel it. Let the music wash over you. Let yourself ask those big questions and see what comes up for you. You might be surprised by what you find.
And we are back, ready to really get into the heart of Mahler's Resurrection Symphony, the text of the finale. Just reading through these words from Klopstock's poem and what Mahler added himself, it's powerful stuff. It really adds a whole other layer to the music.
Yeah, it's incredible how the words and the music work together. Like, think about that moment when the chorus first comes in. It's so subtle, right? Just a whisper against the orchestra.
Right. It's almost like hope slowly emerging out of all that darkness from earlier in the symphony.
Yeah, exactly. And then as the movement builds, that whisper turns into this huge statement. When they sing, mit Flügeln, die ich mir errungen, which means with wings, which I have won for myself, it's like, wow. It's like watching a soul breaking free from everything that was holding it back.
And it's right when that E-flat major key comes back in, too, the one that was hinted at all through the symphony. Chills every time.
Yeah, it's amazing how he uses the music to make those words hit you even harder.
So let's break down some of those key lines from the text. What are some of the ones that really stand out to you?
Well, his first lines from Klopstock's poem, they're really something. Auferstehen, ja, auferstehen wirst du, mein Staub, nach kurzer Ruhe, which means, rise again, yes, rise again will you, my dust, after a brief rest. I mean, what an image, right?
Yeah, it's incredible. Rebirth, renewal.
And then Mahler adds his own lines, too, which are just as powerful. Like, oh, glaube, mein Herz, oh, glaube, es geht dir nichts verloren. Which means, oh, believe, my heart, oh, believe, nothing is lost to you. Such a comforting thought, Like, even in death, there's something that remains.
Yeah, it speaks to that part of us that wants to believe that, that things last forever.
For sure. And then there's that line that just faces suffering head on. O Schmerz, du Alldurchdringer, dir bin ich entrungen. O pain, you piercer of all things, from you I have been wrested. It's like, this declaration of victory, breaking free from pain.
Yeah, like overcoming all the hard stuff that's just part of being human.
Exactly. It's incredible how Mahler takes us through this whole emotional journey, right? From the depths of despair to this incredible feeling of hope and transcendence. It's like he's saying, yeah, life's got dark parts and light parts, but there's something more out there.
Yeah, and I think that's why the symphony still resonates with people today. I mean, we all wrestle with those big questions about life and death and what might come next, And Mahler's music lets us face those questions head on, feel everything, and come out on the other side feeling hopeful.
It's not your typical happy ending, but it's definitely cathartic.
For sure. It lets you work through those tough emotions and find some peace, even joy, in the middle of all the uncertainty.
Right. And what I find so amazing is that Mahler, even though he was a spiritual guy, he doesn't try to push any specific religious dogma in this symphony. It's a message that anyone can connect with.
It's true. It goes way beyond any one belief system. It's like tapping into that shared human experience we all have. It's been a really incredible journey exploring this symphony with you. And to our listeners out there, remember, this is just one perspective. The beauty of Mahler's music is that it can evoke a unique response in each person. So dive in, explore, and discover the Resurrection Symphony for yourself.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. You guys voted and we listened. Today we're getting buff with, you guessed it, muscle.
Should I say getting ripped with muscle?
Sure. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
But seriously, folks, we're using that Wikipedia excerpt you sent us on muscle to really flex our knowledge on this essential tissue.
And believe me, there's a lot more to muscle than you might think. It's actually a really fascinating system.
Okay, before we get too pumped up, let's back up a bit for those who might be new to this whole muscle thing. What exactly is muscle tissue? What does it do and why is it so important?
So at its core, muscle tissue is basically the engine that powers all of our well, all of our movements.
Makes sense.
It's one of the 4 basic types of tissues found in animals, and its claim to fame, its ability to contract. And this contraction is what allows for a really, really incredible range of actions.
From hitting the gym to, like, just digesting lunch?
Exactly. From the really obvious ones, like you said, going for a run or lifting weights, to those less obvious but equally vital processes like digestion, like you mentioned, or even blood circulation.
Okay, so basically no muscle, no life as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of which, our trusty Wikipedia source tells us there are 3 main types of muscle found in us vertebrates, right? Skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Could you give us the quick tour of each, starting with, well, with skeletal muscle?
Sure. So skeletal muscle, that's the type of muscle that most people probably think of when they hear the word muscle. It's responsible for all of our voluntary movements, like moving your arms and legs.
Gotcha.
Every time you take a step or even just stand up straight, you're using skeletal muscle.
So it's all about those power poses, huh?
You could say that, but it's not just about looking good. Skeletal muscle is also essential for things like breathing and even making facial expressions.
Okay, so it's versatile too.
Definitely. Now, moving on to smooth muscle,
Which-
which is found in the walls of our internal organs and also in our blood vessels.
So that's what's working behind the scenes to keep everything running smoothly.
You got it. It's working constantly to regulate blood pressure, move food through your digestive system, even control the amount of light that enters your eyes.
Wow, we don't have to think about it.
Exactly. Unlike skeletal muscle, we don't consciously control smooth muscle.
Okay, so smooth muscle, definitely the unsung hero. And last but not least, there's cardiac muscle, which, well, the name kind of gives it away, right?
Yeah, cardiac muscle is found exclusively in the heart, and it's the muscle responsible for pumping blood throughout our bodies.
Keeps us alive and kicking.
Yeah.
But what makes cardiac muscle so unique that it gets its own special category?
Well, it has characteristics of both skeletal and smooth muscle, which makes it uniquely suited for its job.
A hybrid muscle. Interesting.
Yeah. For instance, cardiac muscle is striated, just like skeletal muscle. That means it has this striped appearance if you look at it under a microscope. But it's also involuntary, like smooth muscle, meaning we don't have to consciously think about making our heart beat.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
So we've got skeletal muscle for those voluntary movements, smooth muscle working tirelessly behind the scenes, and cardiac muscle, keeping our hearts beating in rhythm. Already we're seeing just how diverse the world of muscle really is.
Oh yeah, and we're just getting started. To really appreciate how cool these different muscle types are, we need to look a little closer. Compare and contrast their unique features.
Okay, so let's break it down muscle by muscle. Okay, so we've got our 3 muscle types: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Each one with its own, special skills. And that Wikipedia excerpt you sent over, it actually has this really cool table. It puts all 3 muscle types side by side and you can compare them.
Yeah, it's like a little cheat sheet to help you understand how their structure and their function are, totally connected.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm looking at this table right now, and there's one thing that jumps out at me. It describes cardiac muscle as a syncytium and says it basically acts as one giant cell. How does that even work?
So cardiac muscle cells, they're not actually completely fused together, but they do have these special connections between them called gap junctions. And these junctions, they let ions, those electrically charged atoms, flow freely between the cells.
It's like a direct line of communication.
Exactly. And that creates this electrical network that allows signals to travel really rapidly throughout the entire heart.
Wow. So they're all in sync because of these gap junctions.
Precisely, yeah. And it's this synchronized contraction that allows your heart to beat as one powerful unit.
So cool. Okay, another thing I noticed in this table, it says smooth muscle cells are slow but mighty.
Oh yeah, they're definitely the marathon runners of the muscle world.
Right, because their contractions are way slower than skeletal muscle, but they can hold those contractions for a much longer time, right?
Yes, and that's really important when you think about it. You don't want your blood vessels snapping shut super fast.
Definitely not.
Smooth muscles, slow and sustained contractions are what allow it to, regulate blood pressure effectively and to keep things moving smoothly, no pun intended, in your digestive system.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So slow and steady wins the race for smooth muscle. Now, there's one more thing in this table that I wanted to ask you about. It mentions that cardiac muscle cells are connected at these, branching irregular angles. And it says these angles are called intercalated discs.
Oh yeah, intercalated discs, those are really important. They act like specialized junctions between those cardiac muscle cells, and they actually help those electrical signals that we were talking about. They help those signals pass really quickly from one cell to the next.
So it's like they're the conductors of this electrical messaging system within the heart.
Exactly. Without those intercalated discs, the heart wouldn't be able to function as a unified rhythmic pump.
That's incredible. And you know what? This actually ties in perfectly with that mouse connection we mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah. Tell me more.
Well, there's a type of mouse. It's sometimes called the mini muscle mouse, and this mouse has a mutation that affects muscle growth.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this mutation, it causes the muscles to be much smaller, especially those fast twitch fibers, the ones that are like responsible for those quick, powerful movements.
Wow. So by studying these mini muscle mice, scientists can learn more about how muscle growth is controlled.
Exactly. And it could even lead to like, new treatments for muscle disorders in humans.
That is so cool. Who knew that a tiny mouse could hold such big secrets about muscle?
Right. Okay, so we've covered skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. We've talked about how each one is unique and how they work together to keep our bodies running. But I noticed one thing, the table in this Wikipedia article doesn't really go into detail about the different types of skeletal muscle fibers. We touched on slow twitch and fast twitch, but I'm thinking there has to be more to it than that.
You're definitely right about that. There's a whole world within those categories. And since we're on the topic of skeletal muscle,
Favorite.
why don't we dive into the nitty-gritty details of those fibers next?
All right, so let's talk about those skeletal muscle fibers.
Yeah.
We've got our slow twitch fibers, which I'm guessing are all about endurance.
They're like the marathon runners of your muscles.
Okay.
They're packed with mitochondria, which, as you know, are the powerhouses of the cell.
Right.
And they are really good at using oxygen to create energy.
Which is why they're perfect for things like long distance running.
Exactly. Or cycling, or even just, holding good posture.
So that's why my legs are always burning after a long hike.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the fast twitch fibers, which are more my speed, I think.
You like that quick burst of energy.
Exactly.
So fast twitch fibers, they rely more on what's called anaerobic metabolism, which means they're not using oxygen as their main fuel source. This allows them to generate a lot of force really quickly, but they get tired a lot faster than slow twitch fibers.
So sprinting, weightlifting, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay, in this Wikipedia article, it mentions that there are actually 3 different types of fast twitch fibers. Type IA, type DINES, and type IUB.
Right.
And it says that type IB is actually pretty rare in humans. What's up with that?
So all fast twitch fibers, they're built for power, but they do have some subtle differences.
Okay.
Type IB, that super fast type, it's mostly found in smaller animals.
Like mice.
Yeah, like those mini muscle mice we talked about earlier.
Right. So humans, we mostly have type V and type TI.
Exactly. With type Is being a little bit quicker to get tired than type TI.
Okay, so we're not quite as supercharged as those tiny mice.
Well, not quite, but that's probably a good thing. Having a mix of fiber types is what allows us to, have a range of movements and endurance levels.
That makes sense. So basically, we're all rocking a different muscle fiber cocktail, which kind of explains why some people are like marathon people and other people are all about that, powerlifting life.
Exactly. Genetics play a big role in what your muscle fiber composition is like, and that can influence what kind of athletic activities you're naturally good at.
So interesting. Okay, so we've been really focused on how muscle works. But I just realized something. Muscle color, that varies too, right? I always thought that was just about how much someone worked out.
That's a common misconception. While exercise can definitely affect muscle size and, definition, the actual base color of your muscles, that comes down to something called myoglobin.
Myoglobin. Wait, isn't that like hemoglobin? The stuff that carries oxygen in our blood?
Yeah, it's like hemoglobin's cousin. Myoglobin is specifically designed to store and transport oxygen within muscle cells.
Oh, okay.
So muscles that have higher concentrations of myoglobin, like those endurance-focused slow-twitch fibers, they tend to be a darker red color.
Because they need more oxygen.
Exactly.
That's so cool. So it's like chicken legs. Chicken legs are dark meat because, chickens use their legs to walk around all day.
Exactly. And chicken breasts, which don't get used as intensely, they have more fast twitch fibers and less myoglobin, so they're a lighter color.
Wow. I never knew you could tell so much about a muscle just by its color. We've been talking a lot about like biceps and triceps. But this Wikipedia article, it also mentions some pretty surprising places where you find muscle, like the iris of your eye.
It is amazing. The iris, which is the colored part of your eye that controls how much light gets in, that's actually made up of smooth muscle.
No way.
And it's constantly making tiny adjustments so that you can see properly.
Wow, and we don't even have to think about it.
Nope.
Our eyes are just automatically adjusting thanks to those tiny muscles.
Huh.
Speaking of automatic, what about those erector pili muscles? You know, the ones that give us goosebumps.
Oh yeah, those are pretty interesting. So those tiny muscles, they're actually attached to your hair follicles. And when you get cold or when you experience a strong emotion, they contract and they pull the hair upright.
And that's what causes goosebumps.
Exactly.
That's so cool. It just shows how muscle is involved in so much more than just, our outward movements.
Absolutely. Muscle tissue is like this fundamental part of our biology. It's playing a role in so many different bodily functions, from the obvious ones to the ones that you might not even think about.
Well said. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. From those tiny muscles that give us goosebumps to the powerful contractions of the heart.
It's been fun.
It really has. And I have to say, I've learned a lot about this amazing system. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that muscle is more than just, a way for us to move our bodies. It really is a testament to the incredible diversity and adaptability of living organism. And the more we learn about it, the better equipped we are to take care of it, whether that's through, exercise or diet.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the world of muscle tissue. This is definitely a topic we could spend even more time on. But until next time, thanks for listening. Keep those minds curious and those muscles moving.